welcome to The Nation. I'm Jessy Chahal. Today we'll explore a topic that affects every Malaysian: consumer confidence. In fact, this is also a key indicator of our economic resilience and our economic health. With the economy showing resilience and inflation that is stable, Malaysians are feeling more optimistic about their financial future. Recent data from the Ipsos research reveals that Malaysia Consumer Confidence Index, or the CCI, in January of this year surged by 4% compared to a year ago. But what's driving this growing confidence, and what does it mean for businesses and household spending? Well, to help us unpack these insights, joining me in this edition of The Nation is the principal at Ipsos Strategy 3 Malaysia. Ganes, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, let's get right into it. There is a global comparison as well as a local one. And as we look at how this study shows consumer confidence within the Southeast Asia region, that is showing to be above the global average. At this point, what would you say, based on the research and the findings and the index, of course, are the key factors that is driving this optimism?
Okay. So I think firstly, when we look at optimism, there are many factors that can impact optimism, right? So firstly, when we look at the factors directly, it includes economic conditions, it can include employment factors, interest rates, political stability, and now something new, which is external shocks. So if you were to dissect within
Perhaps
the region...
we can define external shocks.
Yes, coming to that, right? So just 1 minute. So for an example, when we look into it in the context of, say, economic conditions, if you look within the region, we've definitely had strong economic growth within the region. Indonesia is doing well, Malaysia is doing well, and low unemployment, and also stable prices generally boost consumer confidence. So that's one. I think when you have a stable political climate, investments coming in, it creates employment opportunities. And that's when people have got jobs, they feel secure, optimism goes up. So, and then technically with low interest rates within the region, it also fuels people to take on loans to buy things and all that. So it propels consumer spending. So those are all good factors that you see. In addition to that, I think the region also has political stability, which definitely helps boost that, because that's very important for us to have that confidence, right? When your investments will come in when you have a stable political situation. Now, to your question on external shocks, say for an example, when in a change in a political alignment, or change in, say for an example, what happens in the US, for an example,
right,
can definitely have an impact in that. So then you can have supply chain disruptions, you can have commodity price fluctuations. So all this can have an impact. So because of a certain situations that happen in Europe or in the US, then after that you see a realignment in certain political strategies. Then after that it can have impact on commodity price fluctuation. For an example, certain moves can raise the price of oil and all that. So that can have an impact. So those are external fluctuations.
Mm-hmm. Are you seeing a difference in terms of some of this information that is pulled out, whether it's of Gen Z, Gen Y? Are there data that conflicts or shows different results between generations?
I think if you look at it, when you see it with the younger generation, they are less concerned about a lot of factors, right? So they are more happy-go-lucky environment. They just spend. But I think...
But survival is still survival.
Yeah, but I think if you look into the landscape, even in Singapore, Malaysia, in the context, a lot of them are now staying with their parents. They're not purchasing a lot of things. So their disposable income is still high, right? They're doing that, and that's the reason they tend to spend. And there's also a lot of new trends that you see, which is also leading to them spend a lot, like, buy now, pay later, those kind of trends coming in, which gives a lot of other side effects. But at the moment they just tend to spend. But on the more mature demographics, they are more careful of that, and they are more into savings and all that. So that segment probably you will think 2 to 3 times before they spend. But of course, even they are in more of a confident level at the moment, because employment is good, and you get good quality jobs, and that fuels consumer confidence.
We talk about Southeast Asia, and we see that Indonesia leads with the highest consumer confidence. That's at 62% higher than Malaysia and Singapore as well. What do you think is contributing to this strong confidence levels? Is it just because of the sheer volume of numbers, population?
Okay, so firstly, population is not the only attribute to confidence, right? Because if you don't have political stability or you don't have a good governance in place, then it's very hard, right? No matter the population size. But I think, again, going back to some of the factors I mentioned earlier, Indonesia did really well in this. So, for an example, when we look into their economic performance, they did really well where they had a GDP growth of over 5% over the last few years. This consistent growth has fostered a sense of optimism and financial security among consumers there. Second, inflation in Indonesia has dropped to the lowest year-end rate ever recorded, right? So I think this, if you look into the data, more than 60 years, this has been the lowest inflation that they've recorded, right? So this also gives a strong confidence. Then you have got the other thing which is probably attributed to population is the rising middle class. When you have a strong middle class like what you see in Indonesia and even in India in some context, this rising middle class will tend to spend a lot. And when they can spend, it spurs the economy.
Right.
So definitely that's a factor. And I think what's also very important is the element that we look in terms of digital literacy and e-commerce. So you got a rising middle class, you got a younger population, and with the growth in digital literacy and e-commerce, it definitely shoots up the consumer spending through these channels.
Mm-hmm. Walk us through or rather, how does the CCI correlate with economic, factors like unemployment rate and growth or inflation in that aspect? How do we draw this correlation?
Okay, so what we tend to do is we tend to take all the data together and then do a correlation, right? So consumer confidence depends on a few things. So some of the questions that we even ask in how secure is your job in terms of job security and all that. Then we relate that back to see, is it in alignment with unemployment numbers? Is it in alignment with GDP numbers? If everybody is saying consumer confidence is very high, but your GDP numbers, you're contracting, for an example, then there is a challenge, right? So that's something that we will need to take into consideration, and we need to map and see whether it makes sense there. So that's how we do a sanity level assessment on all the data points that we get. So for an example, when we see Malaysia is doing well, we've done better than some other countries within the other regions. Then when we look back at the numbers, it makes sense. When you said Indonesia is doing well, you look at their GDP growth over the last few years, over 5%, inflation at a record low, and then they've got a booming middle class and improving literacy. So it all adds up to that.
So does it look good for us at this point based on the latest findings for Malaysia?
Yes, I think there's a lot of sense of optimism, and I think when you look on the ground, you can definitely see the consumer spending increasing based on how the retail sector has done, how the automotive sector has done, and even the property sector.
I think this puts to rest the questions many of us have as we pass restaurants or try to find parking in malls, and how are all these people spending all this money? And so there is still spending power, and that of course relates to the consumer confidence as well. We take a quick breather. We'll be back right here on The Nation with more discussion. Don't go anywhere. Hi there, welcome back. We're taking a look at Ipsos Consumer Confidence Index and its latest findings. Just before the break, we talked about the consumer landscape within Southeast Asia. And so now, in contrast, it shows that East Asian countries like Japan, for example, have significantly lower consumer confidence. That is quite interesting to me, quite perplexing in that sense as well. What could be the reasons that is behind this disparity between Southeast Asia and East Asia, so South Korea, Japan, and so on?
Okay, so again, it's interesting because we're going to evaluate it based on the same perspective that we saw. So we look at, again, economic numbers, we look again at inflation, demographic pattern. So when you looked at Indonesia earlier, they had a strong growth, but when you see in a mature market like Japan and also Korea, their growth is much slower. So that is also a factor. Second is inflation number, especially in Japan. Inflation has been quite sticky. It's still high, and they have a higher cost of living. And the other fact about them is the demographic shift. They have a more aging population. When you have an aging population, the customer base is much more smaller, and in mature markets, when you have aging population, they generally tend to spend less. So that will also impact. And also cultural factors. It's known in Japan and Korea, they tend to do more savings. So that's another factor if you look very intrinsically. Lastly, geopolitical uncertainties. The region has got its own set of tensions, so that can also play a role. But I think if you look straight zooming into the consumer confidence, I think it's primarily, if you look into inflation factor, demographics, those are the factors that's affecting it.
Right. Now the spotlight on Malaysia. Consumer confidence is at 55% above the global average. That's saying a lot. That's more than half. What does this tell us about how Malaysians are perceiving the economy, and what are some of the main economic indicators that are really influencing our confidence? And has it really changed much, or the factors, have the factors changed?
Okay, so I think again going back to the principal factors, economic growth. We had a strong growth. The numbers from Bank Negara showed for 2024 we had a 5.1% GDP growth compared to 3.6% in 2023. So that's a surge of 1.5%, which is positive, right? And again, we had a great year in terms of exports. So that was also very, very positive. In addition to that, we also have higher household spending, supported by lower inflation and low unemployment numbers. So if you look into all this, you put four key numbers: inflation, GDP growth, unemployment, everything has been positive. So it will definitely fuel in. And I think that also ties back, when you see it on the ground, you can't get car parks and parking, you cannot get car parks in major malls, and you can't get a table, or you have to wait 45 minutes, 60 minutes for a table. That tells you a lot that, it's actually on the ground. So it's quite similar. So this ties back to it. And I think inflation declining, and also household spending, and also I think in the support policies that's being done by the government, right? When the STR goes out, that also helps it. Wages has increased for civil servants, minimum wage going up from February this year. All this will play a factor, right? So it will definitely contribute to the feel-good factor.
So based on that, and if I could query you for an outlook for the rest of the year, what would that outlook be like?
I think if you have a status quo situation, as everything as it is today, the year will definitely be a very positive year. However, we don't live in an ideal world. There are a lot of external concerns that we need to be worried, geopolitical tensions. As I mentioned earlier, Malaysia is a trading nation. So whatever happens in the US can impact us. There are a lot of tariff barriers, trade barriers that's coming into place. These are factors that could impact us, but we'll have to wait and see how it goes. But at the moment, the optimism is definitely high.
Where does inflation sit in all of this? Whether it's the findings or consumers, what role is inflation playing in that sense? And what is the actual transparent factors that are contributing or may not be contributing to inflation?
So I think generally inflation in Malaysia is low because I think government subsidizes a lot of goods, right? From your core items like sugar, oil, and even rice to an extent, right? So there's always a floor prices and all that, ceiling prices. So it helps consumers. Of course, there are challenges in other areas which is more open when you could talk about healthcare, or when you talk about education, especially on the private side. There's definitely a higher inflation. So it is something that we need to take a trade-off. But I think in terms of the needs, not wants, but in terms of the needs, the government has done really well to contain inflation to an extent. But of course, there will be disparity, right? Of course, if you're looking into certain of other kind of thing once, because sometimes on the ground, people can feel things have really surged up. Is inflation really low? Accuracy. But as I mentioned, the inflation is monitored based on a certain number of items of goods in the basket. So those items are definitely controlled, and hence those are the staple items that Malaysians consume on a daily basis. But of course, if you look beyond that basket, then definitely the prices you can see a higher variance.
You mentioned something about things not staying at status quo, and here we see that the study shows that there was a 2% increase in consumer confidence from last month and a 4% rise since January. So that's a lot of movement in just a short period of time. What is contributing to this optimism, and is this reflected, importantly, Ganesh, over all income groups?
So I think generally yes, and as I mentioned, there could be a few factors. Because there was a salary adjustment for the civil servants, and then in addition to that, I think you're going to see this continuation with slightly improvement in the minimum wage, and with optimism as a trading nation, with imports going up, that means exports going up, so definitely you're selling more. So these are factors that will definitely help.
Okay, so we're looking at a few different areas: property, retail, and other industries. Where is the concentration, or where is the movement at this point?
So 2024 was a very interesting year. So if you look at the data, we did well in all three segments, right? So when you talk about property, automotive, 2024 was a year where we exceeded 800,000 cars sold. That's the first year we broke that 800,000 barrier. And then when we look in terms of even properties, we had a very, very good year last year. So generally all sectors have definitely seen a positive growth. The retail sector has definitely seen also a great growth. When we see data by radar and all that for properties, there was less overhang and also higher sales of properties. So across all, I think it's a positive year. And 2024 was a great year in that sense.
That's right. We hope that that remains for 2025, bigger and better as well. We're taking a look at the Ipsos Consumer Confidence Index, or the CCI. We'll be back after these few messages as we learn more about what this study is showing us for the outlook that is for 2025. We'll be right back. Hello, welcome back to The Nation. We're talking of Ipsos's Consumer Confidence Index, that is the CCI, and I'm of course seated here with the principal at Ipsos Strategy 3 Malaysia, Mr. GANESAN. We look at sustainability, consumer behaviour, and of course the buzzword now ESG, and we see a lot of interest within those areas. From the study, is there any findings that is reflective of this?
Not directly in this study, but I think from our experience at Ipsos doing a lot of ESG related studies, ESG, as you rightly mentioned, is a key topic, and I think if you look at larger organizations are definitely taking it more seriously, especially those who are public listed. They've got their own KPIs and regulatory compliances that they need to meet. However, if you look back on the consumer side, there are certain segments which are willing to pay more or willing to only consume ESG related products, but products that are 100% complying to all this will definitely cost you more. So there's always a question whether consumers are ready to put their money where their mouth is, right?
So because there's a cost factor.
There's a cost factor, right? So sometimes when you say, okay, less plastic utilization, and then you make more naturally sourced product and all that, it does definitely increase the prices of this product. Sometimes it can hurt pockets, so that's why people will say that yes, in terms of my intention, yes, I want to use ESG products, but affordability is a factor. So that goes back to volume-based manufacturing and that to help reduce costs. But it is a key thing. We see alignment, especially if you're exporting to certain regions. There are certain compliance that you need to make sure that you comply to. And there are other trends that's also impacting. While in the front, some sources say they're ESG, but then some people will say they're just greenwashing and all that. So there are many elements. It is something that's on and off, but I think it is picking up, and the larger companies are definitely playing a role in it.
So you would see more of that coming to play. Now, while we talk about the CCI, that is the Consumer Confidence Index, while that has increased, help us understand how this really translates into actual spending and then also long-term economic growth. What is it doing, and how are we seeing that translate?
Okay, so for an example, when you have strong consumer confidence, I think we go back to the factor what's driving it, right? Strong economic growth. Now, I have a job and I have a high paying job, then it helps me with spending. Similarly, when inflation is low, I can afford to take loans, and then I service my loan because interest rates are low, right? So when interest rates are low, people will take on loans to buy either a house or a car, and that creates a movement within the market. So that's very, very important. So these are trends that we need to observe. And as long as the key parameters, economic, political stability, and this helps in, and they tie in hand to hand, and they're all good, I think that really helps us. And I think ringgit has also been doing better. So that's also a factor, because your imports can be impacted, right? So when your ringgit is weak, imports cost you a lot more money. So in this context, with the ringgit doing better, imports are not too expensive, it also helps us.
We talk about spending, we also look at earning, and on the back of that, job security. We've seen that that confidence has also increased in terms of job security, investments, and overall spending. Compared to last year, in fact, it's increased by 6%. So quite a fair amount there. Does this indicate a stronger job market on the horizon, or other factors?
Okay, so definitely yes. Why? because if you look at the recent numbers, the investment into the country last year was about 86 billion US dollars, right? Which was about 15% higher than the year before. So we have recorded 15% more investments compared to the year before. So this definitely, with so much investments coming in, it definitely creates more employment, and we are hoping for more high value employment. Through this high value employment, this will definitely give us more opportunity to create jobs. So that's the reason I think the feel good factor is definitely there and is driving growth there.
Anything to add on the wages, minimum wage, for example?
I think the government has taken the bold step first of revising. Of course, some stakeholders will say probably it needs to go up faster, but I think they had to look into various factors. It has been brought up to 1,700 ringgit as of February this year. So this is a move, and of course wages in Malaysia relatively is still low. There is still a lot of work to be done, and there are talks about productivity linked wage structures, recalibrating productivity, and that's where it's important to have high value jobs. So when you get high value jobs coming into these investments, then definitely you will be able to adjust this pay structure, which definitely has to be fixed, and I think the government is well aware of this, and they are looking into various strategies to help with this.
So on the table, status quo, it's looking good, but looking ahead, do you expect this consumer confidence to continue rising, and what can you say about Malaysia's economic growth so far as we are at this point in 2025, but also telling us what risks could potentially dampen this momentum?
Okay, so if I were to sum it up, I think we did really well as a nation in 2024. Now moving to 2025, the first 2 months have generally been positive. However, the biggest challenge for us is the geopolitical tensions and also what's happening in the US with the tariff barriers coming in, trade barriers coming in. It definitely leads to a lot of uncertainty, right? So if more tariffs are imposed on us or in even other countries, how does it impact us? We are a trading nation. So being a trading nation, we definitely have our own set of challenges, and it will definitely have our impact. So I think this is a key factor that I think even the ministers have answered in Parliament, that they are watching very closely, and they're making sure that they have the relevant strategies to tackle this. That would decide on how the year goes. But looking at it, if there's no major challenge from these tariff barriers and trade barriers, I think Malaysia will have a great year in 2025.
And we too will watch for this report and study on the CCI very closely to see what is on the horizon for the next few months. Thanks, Ganesh. And as we've discussed, Malaysian consumer confidence is on the rise, reflecting a more optimistic outlook on areas like job security, investments and spending power. With steady economic growth and increasing trust in financial stability, this upward trend could pave the way for stronger business opportunities and economic resilience in the months and year ahead. I'm Jessy Chahal. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time for more in-depth conversations on topics that matter right here on Bernama TV. Bye-bye.